Welcome to the Culture Lab. I'm your host, Aga Bayer. This podcast helps you turn your company culture into rocket fuel for meaningful growth. It explores how we can make the word work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. It looks at how we can build remarkable cultures that scale as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing.
I work in a culture best when someone can set goals with me and for me, clear, measurable results, like outcome driven that have a real impact on our customers and our business. And then they kind of, set me off to run as fast and well toward that goal. And I believe strongly that that's the culture of high performing teams, especially in the tech space where you have to out innovate people. And innovation is a combination of speed, but pointing in the right direction. So you're pointing in the right direction when you share common outcome-driven goals that reflect what your customers value and what your business needs.
Welcome to episode 74 of the Culture Lab podcast. This episode is brought to you by Culture Brained, a one-of-a-kind global community for leaders and culture champions who want to learn new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures at scale, especially now in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. The Culture Brained community is a place where we come together to answer some pretty darn hard, ungoogleable questions about culture. It's where we work together on our shared mission to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. If this sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, check it out at culturebrained.com. There's a link in the show notes. And now, let me introduce my guest today. This time, we have Yvette Pasqua with us. Yvette is the CTO of Access, where she leads the product and engineering teams with a focus on continuous improvement, iteration, and using data to launch software that helps people become healthier and achieve their wellness and professional goals. Prior to joining Access, Yvette led engineering at Haven, the Amazon, JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway health tech startup, and was also the CTO at Meetup. Her career has included a lot of leadership roles at product development firms and startups like Grindr, and she's now on the board of Chloe Capital, a VC firm that invests in women-led seed stage companies. Yvette lives in New York with her wife, daughter, and Wheaton Terrier, and she's an all-round incredible human being and a culture-brained leader. So I really can't tell you how excited I am to share this interview with you today. Here is Yvette Pasqua.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and chatting with you.
Likewise. Thanks for accepting my invitation. I'm really excited because I know that you have a lot of interesting stuff to share with our listeners. So tell me a little bit about you, who you are, what you do.
Yes. So I'm Yvette. I live in New York now. I'm a mom. I'm a dog owner. I have a wife. I'm a gay woman in tech. We'll just get all the basics out of the way right now. I've been an engineering and tech leader for probably the past 15-ish years of my career. And now I'm super excited to be working for a mission-driven company. The company is called Exos. And what we do is we really drive human performance, and we've been doing that for 20 years now. And the way we are doing that these days is through our virtual coaching platforms. And our mission-driven vision is really just to provide everyone with access to the world's most intelligent coaching services, people, insights, enabling each of the customers that we service really reach their full potential and achieve their goals. And we do that through a combination of helping folks achieve that through mindset, nutrition, movement, which is really the fitness aspect, and recovery, which is a lot about sleep and interval type training. And I feel just so fortunate to be working with this team and working on this at this moment in time, trying to make folks healthier and improve their well-being and performance at a time where the world needs it, now, at least I think now more than ever. So I've been really energized the last while to work on this with the team.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I definitely want to circle back to that. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is excellent in what you do, because I was really inspired by your mission. And I have to say, I visited the website a couple of days ago in preparation for the interview, and I got choked up just watching a video.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think that I am a little bit of a performance optimization geek, and I also always get moved by people who just, chase their dreams and play all out. And it seems like this is exactly your audience. And so, yeah, it was really moving for me to see what you do.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I have a master athlete at home as well. My husband is he does sprinting, and so
wow.
Yeah, I get that insight into what the world of an athlete looks like, and how important it is to, as you have just mentioned, all these areas of your life, how important it is to optimize them and make sure that your mindset is there and your rest is there and you do the right kind of training. So it's all amazing.
Definitely. And the thing I've learned the most is that the same things you do as an athlete to reach peak performance are the same things that you can do as an employee performer, just a regular old tech person like me to reach peak performance. I've learned so much from our experts since I've been here already, and I'm trying hard to better myself. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into that and ask you for some tips and thoughts. But what I really love is exactly that you say that basically one of the core beliefs that your company has is that performance is a universal challenge. So it's not just about athletes, professional athletes, but it's also something that we should be thinking about. So yeah, super interested. And I think for our listeners, it will be really, really interesting to learn what they can do to maximize their performance. But before we go there, I have a question that I ask all of my guests. So let's get that out of the way. And I think that, as always, it's going to be super interested to listen to you answering that question. So the question is, what were the early cultural influences that shaped you as a person?
Yeah. So not to stick to this topic too much, but I've talked about and have thought a lot about how as a kid, I didn't really fit in. I felt lonely. I felt different. There's probably a lot of reasons for that. I didn't come out as being queer until much, much later, but I'm not even sure if that's why I felt that way as a kid. I think I was just kind of shy and very introspective and thoughtful. And I never felt like I had a great time, but the area, like the time I felt the most accepted and close, I think, to kids was playing team sports. And I played, lots of sports as a kid growing up, and then all through high school. And that's really the time that I felt like my social, emotional confidence was built as a kid. I wasn't even that good at sports, to be perfectly honest. I'm pretty slow. I'm only, like 5'3.5" on a good day if I've done my yoga in the morning. And I'm not, I can't jump high, right? But I really loved the camaraderie and the team first aspect of it, and the socialness and the competitiveness. I'm both really social and really competitive, I've learned about myself. And that's where I really felt like I found my people and fit in. And what I ended up doing was just like loving practice and loving working hard to get better and better at sports. And I ended up getting pretty good at some of the team sports I played, despite my lack of any natural talent, just because I loved it so much. And I loved practicing on my own and with the team. And That's one of the really big things that I always look back on in my childhood and younger years. And it really has shaped me as a leader today, especially in engineering and a tech leader. I am extremely obsessed with helping create high-performing teams and empowering those high-performing teams, and really focusing on teams and not individual productivity or efficiency or success. Because when you're shipping software product, to be perfectly honest, it doesn't really matter how good one person is on the team. One person doesn't ship great product that customers really value and makes money for your business. The team needs to really ship it, that cross-functional team. So that's really shaped me. And I always tell that to my teams when I join, hey, I'm going to be really obsessed with teams, not individuals. And this is why.
I love that. I love the fact that you set the expectations on the outset of what sort of a leader you are going to be. And I also love the fact that you share your why with your team, because I know I've experienced that myself from the leaders on whose teams I was, and also being a leader myself, that it has a huge impact on the teams when people can really understand not just what you will be doing, but why you are doing it. Has this been your experience as well, that people resonate with that and that it sort of allows you to start off on the right foot with your teams?
Definitely. There was this whole movement a few years ago in the engineering leadership space where this tool developed that people were writing for themselves called a manager README. And essentially, a README, in the tech world is a file. When you're looking at a piece of code, it kind of tells you how the code works and where you can find everything and why someone built something the way it is. And it's usually the first place you go to when you're an engineer building something new and you're using a new component. You want to check out the README. It's kind of controversial because some folks used it as a way to just say, like, I'm gonna talk over you, and I'm gonna be impatient, and these are all my faults, but just kind of deal with them, right?
Right.
And that was kind of a bad use of the tool. But I've written something that I share with teams when I join, and I've done this at the last 2 companies now that I've joined. I don't really follow the README format because I don't like the negative associations with it. But it's really a tool where I kind of go through like what I've learned in my career and what my latest beliefs are. And there are tons of links in it, kind of outside articles and research and experiences that other leaders and other companies have had. Because one of the things I've just learned is unless I get outside of my team and my network and my world, I'm not learning as quickly, right? And I'm always trying to learn from other companies and other people. But really setting those expectations, things like team are one of them. Another thing I really, I'm pretty ruthless about setting expectations with folks is that, engineering at product companies, we're here to drive business results. We're not here to build perfect code. We're here to really drive business results. And that almost always comes down to shipping valuable product for your customer, right? If you're not driving customer value, you're probably not going to drive business results and make money for your company. And, to be perfectly honest, if you're not making money for your company, you're not going to be a growing engineering team. And if you're not a growing engineering team, you're not going to be a satisfied, happy engineering team that's constantly learning and growing and having new opportunities presented to you. So it kind of works both ways. But anyway, I have this document that kind of lists, 8 or 10 things like that and why I believe them, and some external links to kind of, who out there in the world I think does this great. And I think it does really help set expectations. And honestly, a lot of the reasons why I believe these things is because I had miserable failures in the past where I wasn't as business focused and customer value focused as I needed to be, right? I didn't talk with my teams about, why I personally am so into team versus individual. And there were lots of negative repercussions from that. Some of them, in my opinion, colossal failures on my part or on my leadership team's part. So writing these things down and sharing them is just my way of learning from my mistakes and trying to set expectations with my team when I join.
Yeah, I think this is such a brilliant idea. And especially these days, right, when we are working remotely or in a hybrid model where you can't really build those relationships, and it's really so hard for people to get to know you at a personal level, like what is your life philosophy, why you do things the way you do, and so on and so forth. So by doing this, I think it's a perfect shortcut to a little bit more intimacy. And I'm sure that, I would have loved my managers to provide me with a document like that, where I could just go and see what shaped them as a leader, what's important for them, what their expectations are, and them being really explicit about it. Because there are a lot of implicit messages I find in the workplace, but for some reason, people shy away from being super straightforward about this is what I expect. And
absolutely.
I think right. And particularly in this context of culture, because we are on the Culture Lab podcast, this is for me super powerful, because my definition of culture is a set of implicit expectations about how to think, how to feel, and how to behave in order to fit in. And so when you come in and when you make these expectations so clear, I think it really helps immediately to set the tone and start perhaps shaping the culture in the direction that you wanted to shape it in the cases where it hasn't been that, or just stating, I believe what you believe, guys, so we're aligned. But whatever it is, I think it's super helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, as a leader, you really want to be vulnerable. And it's hard to be vulnerable, like you said, in a remote environment. I joined Exos in September, and I haven't met anyone in person, right? Except for a couple of coffees. I've driven 100 miles to see a couple of people. So being able to do this, you mentioned it, doing it in a written asynchronous way where I shared my document. People could digest it. They could read it. They could kind of read the links. They could explore it. They could come up with questions. I
was going to ask, did people come back with questions?
Yeah. So I did a Q&A actually about a month after I joined. At my Tech All Hands meeting, I just did kind of like a follow-up, intro of me where I talked through some of those points, but just did a Q&A for about an hour. And there were a lot of really great questions. And it's just such a great way to show vulnerability too, as a leader when you join. Leaders are very vulnerable and people often don't think that's the case. And building that kind of understanding of vulnerability and building up that muscle of not being afraid of failure or mistakes, and really just focusing on like continuous improvement and lessons learned, which is very much part of Exos's culture now. So my team really, I think, aligned with that right away and felt really great about that being part of what I wanted to get from the culture and also give to the culture. But there's always some areas that are really new for a team that as a leader you kind of bring in from the outside as well. And those things take a little bit longer, but the more vulnerable you can be, and like you say, the more you can let people sit with the why, I think the faster you can make the cultural change that you want to make as a new leader.
Totally. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so much stuff that I would like to unpack. But one of the things that came up for me is a question for you that I got from one of the CEOs that we have in a bootcamp that we're running currently. It's a bootcamp for founders and leaders of purpose-driven, culture-first businesses. And his name is Marco Bianchi. And I sort of gave people heads up that I'm going to interview you and asked if anyone has any questions for you. And he noticed, interesting, he was stalking you probably, that you that you have just joined Exos. And as a CEO, obviously he was curious what made you want to join Exos and whether you did any sort of, due diligence when it comes to the company culture. Because, and this is me, this is not him, but, you've been someone who has worked at Haven, the Amazon, JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway, and you were the CTO at Meetup. So obviously you were an A-plus talent for Exus. And so I'm curious too, what made you want to join the company, and whether you have done any cultural due diligence to make sure that the environment that you are going to step into is a sort of environment where you can drive change and you can thrive as a leader.
Great question. And I'm recruiting a ton of folks now, and a lot of them, when I'm kind of pitching Exos, and they realize I've joined recently, and they ask me this question. And you know, so what I tell them is two things. Like there are really two reasons. And honestly, leadership team and culture are the two main reasons. You know, mission is a close third. But there are several companies one can choose from that have a great mission that actually make people's lives better and don't just make them like click a like button for advertising dollars, right? So leadership team was the number one for me, but it's related to culture because culture starts at the top. But I really wanted to join a leadership team that would want to continuously learn with me. So again, like that's the cultural value that I was really going after.
So Yvette, I'm assuming that you've known people on the leadership team, or at least you've known of them and their reputation, and you knew that they are open-minded with this sort of growth mindset.
Or not as much. I mean, I really had to uncover that during the interview process and all of the internet stalking that I could do. And, I did more questioning and really digging into this during my interview process than I've ever done before. Because while I met great team members at Haven, I really felt like the way the founding companies in Haven disregarded culture was something I really, really missed. And I wanted to get back to a company where I felt like there was alignment at the executive leadership level that, we're all in this together, but we're, the way we want to do this, the way we want to transform the company and ship new products and grow our revenue is by learning from one another and constantly improving and really having that growth mindset. That's the kind of culture I've thrived in. And when I was the CTO at Meetup, I really felt like I had that with our executive team there. And, I've worked with other teams, before that in the past where I've just felt, I felt that way. And I wanted that back again. So I really poked around and asked a lot of questions, especially of the CEO, my current boss. Sarah Robb O'Hagan. I did a lot of research on her. I asked her a lot of questions. Even when she talked with me about diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at Exos, I didn't just take her word for it. I kind of asked her to show me, right? And you can tell a lot from companies when they say, oh yeah, DEI is a really important thing. And then you say to them, okay, like what programs have you launched? What communications are going out? Like, what are you doing? What are your company goals? And if folks have those at their fingertips, that's impressive, right? But if there isn't anything behind it, they're not really doing the work, especially as a leadership team, to make it happen. And, when I poked into those things with Sarah, like she sent me the company comms and the communications and the goals that the leadership team had set out for the next year. And I was really impressed that not only were they talking the talk, but they were really walking the walk. I also just honestly was very humble to join the team because so many of my teammates have worked at really large, big companies. I tend to work in the tech industry where you're working at smaller companies, but really large, big companies at C-level roles in the past. So I just feel like, and this has proved to be true, I can learn a lot from these folks working in different industries outside tech. Like, how can I learn marketing brilliance and business leadership and, from someone who is the head of finance at Nike, right? Like, how can I learn different ways to be a better leader from them? And it's just proven to be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, again, so much stuff to unpack here. I think one thing that I just want to double click on and maybe underscore is that when you interview for a job, you can actually ask questions, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because very
Especially
often,
at a senior level,
yeah.
you have a little bit more leeway too.
Yeah, totally. And I wonder because I know that our listeners love super technical advice as well sometimes, and even, some concrete tips. Do you have a specific question that you still remember yourself asking during that recruitment process that you feel really helped you to gauge what the culture is, or whether the leadership team is the kind of leadership team that you would like to work with, something that made you feel, okay, this is a good home for me and I think that I would be happy to be here?
That's a great question. Honestly, the thing that sticks in my head the most, another thing that I've struggled with in past companies, and my previous one at Haven was the executive team's relationship with the board. As a leader in the tech industry, your relationship with your board is typically one of the most important relationships that you can have, right? And I'm, constantly learning how to be a better CTO and partner with boards better, right? And communicate, and help them understand the inner workings of the company and the technology as well as possible, because it's often not as accessible to them. But I was, I really wanted to get a sense for how does this board operate? Like, how is the relationship? And, the board wanted to get a sense of me as well. So they set up a meeting with one of our board members, one of the more technical kind of product experience board members. And the biggest question I remember asking and really liking the answer of was, well, how do you really measure success of your company's objectives, right? Like, what does good look like to you? How do you validate that? I think that's actually how I phrased it, thinking back upon it. Like, one of the lessons I've learned a ton is I had a coach, just kind of remind me a while ago after I realized I really screwed something up. She reminded me, you trusted, but you didn't verify, right? As a manager and a leader, right? So I think that's what I asked this board member. I kind of asked, how do you verify that the company is like doing well, other than them just presenting it to you? And what I wanted to hear was measurable results and outcomes. What I didn't want to hear was lots of meetings and presentations and micromanagement from a day-to-day level. I really, I work in a culture best when someone can set goals with me and for me, clear, measurable results, like outcome driven, that have a real impact on our customers and our business. And then they kind of, set me off to run as fast and well toward that goal. And I believe strongly that that's the culture of high performing teams, especially in the tech space, where you have to out innovate people. And innovation is a combination of speed, but pointing in the right direction. So, you're pointing in the right direction when you share common outcome driven goals that reflect what your customers value and what your business needs. So I felt like I got that answer from this board member in a really good way. And that stuck with me a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's super important. That's amazing. And thanks for diving into this topic with me, because I think for a lot of people who are listening to this, whether they are the CEO looking for amazing team members or someone aspiring to step into a new role at the C-suite level, I think that everything that you have shared is super, super useful in terms of how can you make sure that the next company that you are going to join, or the next person that you are going to hire, is the right fit for you. But also at the same time, I don't want to miss the opportunity to really pick your brain and talk about the stuff that you feel passionate about and, the field that you know best. Because you've been a tech leader for many years. And so I guess the first question that I have for you, and maybe then we can unpack it, is what do you love most about your field? What do you love most about leading product and tech teams?
It's been different things at different times. I think, earlier in my career, I just loved building and making, right? I loved like literally the feeling of writing code and seeing it on a screen and being able to touch it and feel it and to have impact on other people who could use your product and touch it and feel it, right? But that's what drew me to the industry to begin with. I literally just loved making things and making things with other really smart, driven people. And I was a hands-on engineer for about 7 or 8 years at the beginning of my career. And then I'd say like the next third of my career, I've been doing this a little over 20 years now. I think what I loved the most was just learning how to be a leader and a manager. And learning how to do that well, because I don't think anyone is born or gets into this world knowing how to do that well, right? I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I learned from them. And often the people mistakes are the hardest mistakes you make, and they stick in your head the most because those are real humans that you're managing and leading. And when you make a mistake, like the humanity inside of you never lets you forget that, right?
Can you share, if it's okay with you, if it's not too much to ask, one of the biggest mistakes that you feel you've made and what you learned from it?
I would say like one of the biggest people mistakes that sat with me for so long. The first time I had to let somebody go, right, to fire somebody, I had never done it before. And my manager, who was really supportive at the time, he was in Los Angeles and I was in New York, and this person reported to me in New York, and this person was more experienced than me, but they just weren't doing the job, right? And it was really clear to everybody they weren't doing the job. But I didn't know how to prepare for that conversation. And I did a really horrible job of both being efficient and to the point in that conversation, and knowing how to manage it when it started to go off the rails a little bit. Now, it's still one of the hardest things I ever have to do as a leader is to let somebody go. 'Cause, you've invested in them as a human, and they're, almost definitely a great human, which is not the great human for the role they're in. But now I write down what I'm going to say. I practice it in advance. Like earlier on, I would do role playing with somebody else, and I make it really specific and to the point. And if things start to go off the rails, I just say the same thing again, right? And it's sadly something that I'm proud of figuring out how to do well. But it was so hard when I first tried to do it.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for saying that you are actually role-playing some of these conversations, because I think it just makes it so real how difficult these conversations are, and that no one is really great at doing that. But also it makes me think of this quote that I've seen recently. I think it was from Tim Ferriss. And he said that your amount of success in life generally, and I think definitely in leadership as well, is directly proportional to the amount of uncomfortable conversations that you are willing to have. Right?
That's so true. Yeah.
I love that. I think it's a huge part of leadership to be willing to have these conversations. And obviously firing people is not just one of those, it's just one of those uncomfortable conversations. And maybe not even the worst one. I don't know. What is your worst scenario? Like, is this the most uncomfortable conversation that you can have with someone, or something else?
Honestly, it's turned into not the most uncomfortable, because honestly, once you've gotten to that point, if you do your job well in that conversation, it's 5 minutes, and then, you help them move on, and, you help them network and get a new job, and HR helps them as well. And you turn into really just a empathetic support service, right? But it's very definitive, and there's no gray area. The harder conversations are when you're trying to coach somebody up, and mentor somebody up from really struggling, and you're not sure if they're going to make it. There's just so much more gray area there, and balancing the line of being direct, but empathetic and kind is always quite hard. But I don't know. I actually distracted us from your main question before.
Yes, what you love most about
what
your
I
field.
love most. So the third stage, and I feel like that's where I'm at now, is what gets me the most excited now is to drive customer value with the products that I'm helping my team build. And, honestly, I'm no longer building it myself. And I miss that a little bit, but I think I'm honestly better at leadership and managing than I ever was at writing code and building. So I feel like I'm helping the team the most. And I'm not even a day-to-day manager anymore, right? But I really love understanding the business constraints and the business problems that we're trying to solve and really trying to understand customers. I sit in on user research and interviews and read a lot, really whatever I can about, how to just be closer to customers and drive value for them. And that's what I'm most excited about, and doing that at an ever increasing scale, right? So at Meetup, we, in my time there, we went from having about 20 million total members to about 50 million total members. And at Exos right now, we're launching 2 new products from the ground up at the same time, which is crazy, but super fun. And while we don't have scale yet, the idea is just to have a bigger impact on our customers of our software products over time. And that's what gets me most excited these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that sounds amazing. And it's also a super challenging area. So I want to share a conversation that I had recently with one of the CEOs I work with. She runs a company in Israel. Again, a purpose-driven business with a really inspiring mission and products that are needed by everyone. And she says she has huge problems and challenges with her engineering team and the way they communicate with the rest of the org. So in her view, what happens is they get a request and then they go into their cave and create something that just completely has nothing to do with what was needed. And so I wonder whether you can speak to this, and also what advice would you have for this CEO about how she can be inclusive and how can she help her engineering teams to contribute to her organization's mission critical goals? Because I feel I have a sense that, yes, of course, the engineering team needs to flex and be more collaborative and communicative, obviously, but probably also they will need some help in doing so.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a common problem, and I've worked at companies that have operated that way. And some companies I've worked at operated that way, and we're just kind of getting by. And it was, a big part of my job to figure out how to break the engineering team out of operating that way and help break down silos at the company. And, that's one of the things that we're always conscious of at Exos now, and I'm working hard on that. So it's very pertinent to what I'm doing right now. But I think, the first thing is you actually have to set up the way the teams work and are organized in a way where engineers can communicate and can be productive. And so the way I think about it is, if you think of your engineering team more as your engineering team and less as individuals on a product team, you already are doing it from an org perspective. You're already doing it wrong. There's something that a lot of folks in my industry reference, which is Conway's Law, and I'm kind of bending it in this case. It doesn't exactly mean this, but essentially it means, what it does mean is you're going to ship the org chart of your company, right? And bending that a little bit, if you think of your engineers as an engineering team, they're going to ship software that's really disconnected from the rest of the business. And there's not going to be a good flow there. If you think of your engineers as members of, say, the retention team or the growth team or the customer engagement team, or if you have 2 or 3 products at your company, if you think of your engineers as members of each of those product teams, and that's how you think of them first and foremost, you have it right at that point, right? So I think the first thing as a CEO that you want to do is you actually want your org chart to set things up for success. And then the second thing I think you need to do is set your team's goals up for success. And this is where you really have to partner with your CTO or your VP engineering, because the engineering goals have to be the same as the product and business goals of those cross-functional teams, right? So, product team blue, they need to be setting business and product goals that everyone on the team is going to be focused on and pushing hard for. And there can't be separate engineering goals off to the side that the team's responsible for, because again, then you're kind of creating that chasm, you're creating that silo, you're creating that misalignment. And that's when communication just gets even harder, because you're inadvertently pulling the teams in different directions.
Totally.
Go ahead.
I just want to zoom in on this because a lot of companies that I know of, obviously this is the intention and aspiration, right? To have everyone pulling in the same direction and contributing to the wider goal. And sometimes it becomes really challenging in execution. So I'm wondering whether you have any ideas or tools to share, like how do you align the whole organization and have them pull in the same direction? Are you using any like OKRs? And then if yes, what tools are you using to really help people even visualize this? So like, yes, we are working, for our customers, not just on this amazing, brilliant product that no one eventually wants to use or buy.
Yeah, which is most products, right? It's such a great question, and there's no one size fits all answer. It really depends on like how big is your company, what stage are you in, what experience does the company have with setting goals. But in I think a ideal world, I do really like using OKRs, not because of the dogmatism of OKRs. I'm actually the kind of leader who hates doing anything dogmatically, right? Like I hate, I use Agile and Scrum in quotes when I talk about it, because the dogmatism there horrifies me. But I love using OKRs because really it's answering 2 questions, and engineers specifically want these 2 questions answered. And this kind of comes back to the communication thing. But, when you're writing OKRs, you write an objective. Why are you writing that objective? Well, that tells the team why the thing they're doing is important, which often, like many teams never know. If you're just doing kind of KPIs and you're just having people hit a revenue number, they kind of know like money is important, right? I would hope so. But when you get into real metrics that teams move, like they need the answer. Why is the thing they're working on important? And that's where objectives come in, and prioritizing objectives is so important for companies to do. So whether you're setting company OKRs or team level OKRs, prioritizing your objectives amongst the 10 objectives that you could be working on this quarter or this half of a year or even this month, having real alignment at the leadership level, whatever that level is, exec or team leaders or GMs, depending on how big your company are, having real alignment on those objectives is really important, because that tells your team why the thing they're working on is important.
Totally. For the listeners who are not familiar with OKRs, we're going to post a link where you can read up on it. Great. But basically, the idea is, and this thing that you mentioned about why is it important, people often mix objectives with key results. So they will say, an example from our lives would be, I want to lose 10 pounds. This is not an objective actually. And you need to go a level higher and ask yourself, why do I want to lose 10 pounds, right?
Exactly.
What will it do for me? And then you arrive eventually at something like, I want to increase my fitness level so that I can play with my kids or whatever. So this is the level that we're talking about when we talk about objectives. So objectives would be, can you give us just an example of a couple of objectives from your company that you are currently prioritizing? If it's, of course, not something that you cannot share.
I mean, I could, but even just using your example, like, I think is super tangible for people, like, and it kind of relates to us because when I speak with the coaches here at Exos, one thing I learned is, they really get to the root of like, why does someone want to lose 10 pounds, right? So like the objective in all of that could be, anything from, I want to lose 10 pounds so that I can become a starter on my soccer football team and make money during my family during the prime of my career. Like I literally was told by a coach that once they really got into it with an athlete who wanted to like become, leaner and faster, like after asking kind of the 5 whys, they really got to the objective behind it. Well, this is the prime of my career and I want to make money for my family that's growing now, right? So that would be the objective. And one of the key results could be, I've lost 10 pounds and my 100-yard dash speed has gone down by 0.2 seconds or something, right?
Exactly, yeah, totally.
Or like another objective could just be for someone who might not be an athlete in that situation, my body hurts and I know if I lose weight, I'll feel better. And my happiness and performance, with my family and life and work will just feel better. Right. So that's a really different objective than the other one. But they're just as valid, and you could actually measure like those key results could apply to any objective.
Yeah. Totally. And it's kind of a good segue, I think, to dive into Exos and your mission, because it's a common, as you said, you don't want your mission to be something that just gives you a lot of likes on social media, but actually you never bring it to life, or you only bring it to life externally. So you only bring it to life with your customers or users or whatever. And I think it's a case with a lot of businesses that have an inspiring mission, that they actually do a lot of amazing work on the outside, but they fail in bringing this mission to life within the company. And you've already mentioned that, like, you've learned a lot about well-being and wellness and fitness and performance while at Exos. So I'm assuming that probably you have been able to bring this mission to life internally as well. So my question is, how does that manifest? And also, what are the practices that you adopt to really make it real for people and have someone who normally in a different organization would feel completely disconnected from your mission actually see how they contribute to that larger goal of helping people, be optimize their performance, whatever it means for them?
Yeah. I mean, so I think there's two sides of it. There's kind of like living that yourself, right? And so culturally, one thing we're doing right now is one of my favorite parts of working at Exos and being part of this culture is twice a year we have what we call continuous improvement summits. And they're led by our performance team. And that team is, that's where all of our coaches and trainers and neuroscientists and nutritionists and physical therapists and all those folks sit. And we have like thousands of those people at Exos who service all of our different clients. And they run these performance improvement summits where it's a whole week of just learning from both internal and external folks in the industry across our 4 pillars that we kind of like identified as our methodology 20 years ago. And we've partnered and created and used science-backed research across those 4 pillars of mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery I mentioned before. But our continuous improvement really like is centered around those 4 pillars. And I yesterday I did a so yesterday was a great day. I did a 9 a.m. hour-long, really intense, kind of mat on the ground, like strength workout that was frankly way too intense for me, right? Like from Mark, our president and founder, who's like literally a world-renowned coach and has coached elite athletes for 20 years. But just seeing how one can train and operate at that level, and me trying to modify things and follow along was just super amazing. And then later in the day, I attended a nutrition talk by another internal person, where I learned how to bust all the myths about common nutritional things that folks believe. And while it was geared towards coaches who are helping clients in this area, I learned so much about how to become a better just performer in my life and at work because of changing some things I'm doing with nutrition and eating. So having those summits twice a year have been just really eye-opening as to how much the company invests in like constantly, training people and learning new things and continuous improvement. So that's been just pretty awesome as someone who's taking in all this information now to see. And the reason why it's really important for my team to attend is because those are the products we're building for folks, right? We're building consumer-facing products that allow our coaches and really enable and empower our coaches to deliver their services virtually to anyone in the world who can access the internet and access our apps on their phone. So the more we really understand these things, the more we frankly understand the product that we're trying to enable and empower. Because unlike some other companies where tech is the product, or the product is a marketplace created by technology. So an example of where tech is the product is Facebook, right? An example of where there's a marketplace created by technology is something like Lyft, where you have your supply and demand sides. What we are is a tech-enabled services business, right? Like the magic special sauce of Exos is our amazing coaches and our 20-year science-backed methodologies based in our 4 pillars that have worked for elite athletes for 20 years, and we've brought to quote unquote regular people at our corporate clients and soon to consumers. But really understanding how the human side of the product works really helps us ship products in a way that is empathetic to both the customer, but we consider our customer our coaches as well. Like the tools and software that we're building need to enable them to deliver these services virtually in a great way.
Yeah, totally. Which is another point, I think, to add to the list of what CEOs can do to help their engineers really contribute to what their organization is trying to accomplish. Just really give them that visibility and that connection with the product and what they do in the world, and also connect them to the final users so that it becomes a little bit more real, right?
Because absolutely. I think
very often these people are locked down in a room somewhere and they really don't have access to customers. And we've had Giff Constable on the podcast, and he talked about talk to humans.
Yeah.
Right? It's one of the key principles. If you want to have a great product, you really need to talk to your end users. And what is a better way to create these conversations, if not with the folks who are developing those products?
Absolutely. And you bring up Giff. I learned that from Giff firsthand when I worked with him at Meetup. And it's one of the things that I realized I wasn't doing well as a technology leader. I wasn't investing enough in user research and talking with humans. And I was often too data-driven and really only looking at customer data and not getting behind the data, understanding kind of the why and the context around why customers and users were doing what they're doing. So I actually brought GIF to Exos to consult with us on that very topic and help us transform to a customer-centric technology and product org until we hired an amazing head of product, Jason Goodhand, who I'm working with now, who is very much cut from the same cloth. But, similar, I totally agree with you. Similar to what I said, setting up the org structure so that engineers are not behind the customer curtain, right? Where your user research and the talking to humans is first and foremost the whole team's responsibility. Engineers might not know how to set up user interviews and surveys in a great way at first, but they can sure help out and they can sure shadow those things and really get into the weeds and be part of the team synthesizing all that information about, okay, what did we learn from the 10 user interviews that we conducted last week? And that's literally the exercise that one of our product teams went through last week, where they did 10 user interviews after sending out a survey to screen people and find the right customers to talk with. And the entire team, on Friday synthesized those and figured out, all right, this is the hypothesis we were trying to test. This is what we learned from actually talking to humans and talking to potential customers. How does this change what we're going to build? And let's just keep rinse and repeat with that customer-centric methodology. Totally.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it's also so important to hear you speak about how you build the architecture for this to emerge, right? And for this to happen. And very often people will also ask me, why do you talk about architecture or systems or processes or structure when we talk about culture? But that's exactly it. You want to create an environment where it's easier to do the right thing, right? And This is part of culture building. You really need to have the right structure, the right systems, the right connections, so that it's easier for people to engage in behaviors that you want to see more of. And in your case, when we talk about that customer-centric product development, how important is that, right? Having these systems and structures and engaging people in these conversations. Thanks for sharing that. I'm sure that this is going to be super, super useful to the people who are listening. I'm mindful of time. I have one question that I know you were not particularly eager to engage in, because diversity and inclusion has been, I think, really discussed to death. I get that. And so my question is, what advice do you have for leaders who complain that they can't seem to find diverse candidates who fit job requirements? And be as provocative as you have to be.
All right. Thank you for that total leeway. And I actually really liked the way you asked your question, because part of my frustration with this question is hearing the complaints of leaders who are having a hard time with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because when I probe and I ask the question, well, how much time are you spending a week on this? I often get, well, I've got my D&I. We hired our D&I leader, and my recruiters are trying to source a real diverse pipeline. And we have an intern program going. My engineering managers on the ground are hiring interns from diverse backgrounds. But that doesn't answer my question, which is, what are you personally doing as a leader? And how much time are you investing in it, right? And I've just learned over time that if you're at a company where your leaders aren't investing in it, they might talk the talk, but they're not walking the walk, right? And it's going to be empty promises. And I'm sure your podcast people talk all the time about how culture starts at the top. And culture starts at the top for many reasons, but a couple of them I can think of off the top of my head is what you just mentioned before. As exec leaders, you need to build the systems and the rules by which people operate in, right? And if your recruiting systems that you're building and your employee engagement systems that you're building aren't inclusive, and they're not, and the goals aren't, and you don't have diversity goals, right? And you don't have retention goals, and you don't have equitable employee engagement goals, then it doesn't matter what band-aids you ask more junior people to place on your company. If you're not doing that work at the top and creating those systems and growing your own understanding and empathy and networks, you're just not going to get there, I learned over time that I didn't know enough about diversity, equity, inclusion at all. And, that kind of came to light when I took the CTO at Meetup job. I had such a outspoken team that felt really strongly about this area, and I kind of figured, well, I'm a queer woman in tech. Like, I know all about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I quickly realized, like, I know nothing. Yeah. I'm a white woman who went to a private college, and I realized, like, I need to listen a lot more. So I did go, I did speak at a lot of women in tech panels and events. And while I don't do that as much anymore, because I think the most value I can add is just being a queer woman at a normal tech panel, right? Not a woman in tech
exactly,
panel,
yeah.
right? But what I learned from meeting people, and explicitly, at one point I had a policy where if any person from an underrepresented group in tech wanted to have a coffee with me, like, I would say yes. It might not be that week or that month, but I would say yes. And what that helped me do is just listen and learn from people, especially people of color, especially people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And I feel like, I probably spoke with hundreds of people, honestly, over the last 7 or 8 years. And
so are you extending an invitation for this to happen, or it just happens?
Sure. Mm-hmm. I really miss that connection and that understanding and learning. There aren't in-person events right now, and I can't wait for those to happen again. The meetup, the community building blood still runs through me. But I've done virtual coffees, and I spend probably 20 hours a month virtually reaching out to people on LinkedIn from different groups, so I can just hear their perspectives on things, right? I hired a head of machine learning and data this year, and I probably reached out myself to 100-ish people on LinkedIn to just try to figure out, like, what should I be thinking of? What should I be looking for? You're a leader in this space right now. Even if you don't ever want to work with me and don't want this job, like, I kind of asked them, what should I be looking for in a leader? How would you set this up? Like, how would you sequence the work? And I just learned so much. And, I targeted a really diverse slate of folks, right? I targeted growing my network with people I didn't know, people outside of my network, lots of people from underrepresented groups. Honestly, I only really targeted reaching out to people from underrepresented groups because it's so easy to create a diverse pipeline of people from not underrepresented groups, right? So I had to do the extra work of that. And I ended up speaking with about 30 or 40 people. And through that networking, I hired a great candidate. But more importantly, I learned a lot more about how to hire the right candidate for the role. But I got a diverse perspective from people from all different backgrounds and all different groups on that. And I learned a ton.
That's amazing. And thank you for sharing this, because it's one of my frustrations as well. And not even just around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but generally around hiring. Because what I hear a lot of companies that I work with or I know complain about is we simply can't find the right candidates, full stop. So it's not even right. And I ask the same question. So I ask, how much time on weekly basis do you spend on building relationships with people that you believe you might want to work in the future with? And it's like 0. And when we know that we need someone, we just scramble and contact our recruitment agency and start the recruitment process. I'm like, yeah, it's a bit too late to do that. Of course, you can't find the right candidates, right?
It's way too late, and it's a long-term game. And as a white person in tech, like you've got to grow your network. If you want to be able to reach out to your network and interview a diverse slate of candidates for a leadership role, like you've got to work really hard the 12 to 18 to 24 to 36 months before that to grow your network and talk with those people and make some connections. And the work that I'm doing now is gonna pay off like in 6 months, but it's gonna pay off probably a lot more in 12 to 24 months. And that's just the extra work that one has to put in, and there's no way around it. There's no shortcut. There's no silver bullet. There's no outsourcing it to your recruiting firm or your junior people. And that's why I get so worked up about all this, honestly.
Yeah, I 100% understand that, because it has been a frustration of mine as well. So I'm so happy that you see the same thing and that you've also seen benefits of investing in that. And it's really, it's a lag indicator, right? Your pipeline is a lag indicator. You really need to start, just like, any other area of your business. You need to think in those terms. So it's going to take time.
And you can measure it, right? Like you can measure, just like product. You can measure both the leading and the lagging indicators. I just created OKRs for myself. And one of my objectives is to like hire and grow a high performing, customer centric technology team across product engineering and design, right? And I have some key results, which is, the number of folks I need to hire this half of the year. But another key result is the number of folks from underrepresented groups that I need to hire this year. And that's on me. And then my action plan to do that, the leading indicators are, how many people am I personally reaching out to and trying to source from my network and outside of my network? How many folks am I talking with? But the key result is, the proof is in the pudding there. Like, what are the actual outcomes that I'm driving? So I'm probably not going to hit my goal, by the way, because I've set an aggressive one of hiring.
That's what OKRs are all about, right?
I'm trying to hire. I'm trying to hire 15 people this half of the year, and 10 of them from underrepresented groups. So I'm going to try my darndest to do it, but I probably won't hit my goal. But again, that's what I mean by starting at the top and setting the tone culturally. Not only am I setting aggressive goals I'm not sure I can hit, and that's important for my team to see me fail at some of them. But also setting a goal that I'm personally accountable for.
Mm-hmm. Love that. And based on what you have just shared, I feel like we have this common belief around the importance of building a strong network, including peer network as well. Mm-hmm. So can you speak to that? Because I get a sense that just, looking at the stuff that you've done, that you've invested in that as well. So like building a strong peer network that helps you grow as a professional, but also that helps you navigate the changes and the challenges that you face at work. And I think particularly at your level, at the C-suite level, it's lonely, right?
Mm-hmm, definitely.
And so talk to me a little bit about this. What have you done? What were the benefits? What would you tell people do as a first step to build a strong network?
Yeah. Oh, it's so important. And there's this woman, Laura Hogan, who's been my coach before, and I've hired her to work as a consultant at Meetup for a while. She's a coach now. And she wrote a great article about your manager Voltron, she calls it, right? You remember, and I love this visual. You remember the Voltron from, I guess, the 80s, right? I'm dating myself now, but the Voltron was all of these different pieces that made this giant mechanical monstery kind of thing, but it was composed of all these different pieces, right? And that's what she was getting at. But I found that to be so important. Like you said, it's really lonely being an engineering leader, being a CTO, because not only are you a leader and an executive, and it's lonely being an exec in general, but typically your executive peers have no idea about a lot of the challenges that you're facing, because a lot of them are so technical, right? So I've really relied so heavily on my network, and honestly, my network of people at companies that I aspire to work at, or people I've seen their talks, and have been really impressed with what they had to say. Like, a lot of people I just don't know and haven't ever worked with, so I can learn a lot, and have them in my own Voltron, right? Like there was someone who did this, amazing talk I saw on the internet, and I kind of just tracked down how I could find her, and I realized, oh, she lives in New York. This is great, and we had a coffee, and she has an 8-year-old daughter, same age about as mine, and we've been talking ever since. She's the principal architect at Squarespace and worked at Google for 10 years. And I've just learned so much about, how can I set up a architecture strategy at scale, right? And I'm not using that now, but I had to use that at Meetup. So
Yvette, sorry, I'm going to stop you here, because listeners will kill me if I don't ask you this question. So how did you reach out to her? Because I think it happens to a lot of people, right? And people then just say, I don't want to be weird. I don't want her to think that I'm stalking her or whatever. And so they never actually reach out. So how did you do it?
There's two ways, right? And I usually have to do the first way, which is like, I just have to do some stealthy internet search to try to find out how to connect with them, right? And LinkedIn is obviously a great way to start, but like most engineers hate LinkedIn, and even leaders aren't really on LinkedIn. So, I probably get like a 50% at best, depending on who I'm reaching out to, response rate, if I try to LinkedIn message somebody cold. The other way is like I scour GitHub and see if I can see the code right? Like you have to get really tricky and find an email address, or, message them on Twitter or something, right? Yeah. But to me, it's more about like how you're reaching out, because like
so tell
you
me
could do it in a vague way, which I think ends up being somewhat creepy, or you could just do it in a really transparent, authentic way. And that's the kind of communication tech folks like expect, right? These are all really logical folks writing code and logic all day and working on open source projects and really valuing transparency and authenticity and logic. So reaching out and communicating in that way is like how I work with my team, but it's also how you reach out to folks. And I'm just honest with them. I'm just like, hey, I'm Yvette. I'm the CTO at Exos. Like, I see you've done this awesome thing. I'd love to, to buy you a coffee someday, right? And in the virtual world, I can't really do that, but I'll get back to that soon. I'd love to buy you a coffee someday and just pick your brain on, how you roll out a scalable architecture strategy. And if there's anything I can help you with, I'd love to chat about any topic you'd want as well. I'd make sure to make it a super convenient time for you during your day, and go from there. And often people are just as lonely as you are, and they want to talk about stuff too, right? So
totally. Has this been your experience? Because it has been my experience. Yeah,
definitely. Absolutely. The second, someone writes back, they're almost always like, oh yeah, and I'd like to talk about this topic with you. And the second you end up meeting, the half hour you promised that you'd only take up with them and wouldn't interrupt their day for longer than that, you both want to stay for 45 minutes to an hour, and you're kind of like running back to your next meeting. So just get over that fear of social awkwardness, and kind of just putting yourself out there is a muscle. And the more you build that muscle, the easier the ghosting or rejection gets when half of the people just never get back to you. And that's okay, because you're building your network with people who are actually interested at that time to have that same connection.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. And also, if someone says no, then that's also okay, right?
Totally.
Totally okay. And actually, someone said it's a bit cheesy, but sometimes I like to think about this and remind myself of it. I used to be in sales very early on in my career. And I had someone, I don't remember who, but someone in my life say that yes lives in the land of no. Especially if you're in sales, right?
That's amazing. I'm going to steal that. I love that.
It's great, isn't it? And it's really, I can't tell you. So I was like 20 years old back then, and it's still with me. And I remind myself almost every day when I get a no, I'm like, okay, so I'm actually in the land of yes, because I'm getting no's. It's good.
It's so good. And I joke with my head of people right now, like, we literally are messaging folks on LinkedIn to grow our networks. I'm messaging software engineers with 2 or 3 years of experience, because I know I can learn from them as well. And I want to grow my network and just hear I spoke with someone the other day. How are you building a data engineering platform at X company that I've always been interested in hearing more about, right? But we joke that most of these kids won't even reply to our message, and it's, it shows a lot of how burnt out, folks in the industry are at, I think, virtual coffees and Zooms, but also, it's just a great reminder of in order to learn and grow, you have to just get through a lot of rejection.
Totally.
No matter who you are. And we joke with one another about it. It's not going to hold us back, but it's just so it's almost laughable, how many people just totally ghost us and don't even care about getting back to us.
Yeah, it's true. And it has been the same experience for me in many cases, but that's the game we play, right?
Yeah.
I have a sense that we could go on like this for 4 hours,
Totally.
but I'm feeling that we need to start wrapping up. So let's move to the rapid fire questions. So I have 5 questions for you. And the idea is that we'll brush through them and try to answer them in under 2 minutes. Are you up for the challenge?
Totally up for it. I might even try to do it. I'm like a lightning person. Maybe I'll try to do it. Wait, 2 minutes total or 2 minutes each?
No, total.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Let's do it.
Awesome. So how do you define organizational culture?
Clear lines of ownership and accountability and empowerment.
And what is a sign, or perhaps signs in plural, that a company culture needs some work or perhaps even a major overhaul?
When your leaders stop talking with one another. As their first team, as Camille Fournier likes to call it.
Mm-hmm. Do you admire any companies for their culture? And if yes, why?
Purely engineering culture, I've always admired Spotify, partially because they publicized it so well. But I specifically admire their high-level cultural just attributes of really forcing leaders to think a lot about alignment and autonomy and being in the high alignment, high autonomy quadrant. That's something I come back to on a daily basis.
Love it. Thanks for sharing. And we'll post some links in the show notes for our listeners to learn more about it. And what books on culture, on leadership, or perhaps even other topics that you find helpful for you as a leader would you recommend to our listeners?
I do think Camille Fournier's book, I'm horrible at remembering names of books and things like that, but I think it's called The Manager's Path. That's one of my go-tos, and I'm actually going to bring out a second book from my nightstand right now because I don't remember. Are you in your
bedroom as well? Because I'm in my bedroom as well.
I'm in my bedroom right now, yeah.
It's so funny for the listeners. You can't see us. We're doing only audio. Totally. This is the quietest room of my house, so I'm in the bedroom as well.
Exactly. And I told my family, I'm doing a podcast, don't interrupt. But Laura Hogan wrote a book, Resilient Management. That is one of my go-tos as well. So I'd recommend those too.
Thanks. And what is one thing that our listeners could do tomorrow to build their own culture lab and start cultivating a culture that will help them and their teams to bring their vision to life?
Oh, great question. I would say being authentic and vulnerable is kind of a foundation for building the understanding, which then builds the trust with your team to kind of help build and change culture, right? Because if you're saying build culture, you probably mean like add to culture or improve or change or
yeah.
And I think starting at a place of authenticity and vulnerability is essential, because culture is so human, emotional, and if there isn't understanding and trust formed first, it's going to be really hard for folks to, frankly, just emotionally be able to change and grow a culture, I think.
I love that. Thank you. And so finally, in closing, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners?
Talk with your customers. I've learned that the hard way. Learn from them. You know, they're the folks that they really pay your bills. So get as close to them as possible.
Yvette, if people want to reach out to you, I know that you've said you are open to it. So what would be the best way on LinkedIn? Where can people find you, and where can they contact you?
Yeah, you can totally message me on LinkedIn. You can also find me at Twitter, and my direct messages are open. My handle is Lola Robot, LOLAROBOT. It's from my days of when I toured with an electronic musician, mostly in Europe, by the way. But that's why, we'll get into that next time. But
we need to have you back. There are some stories that we haven't had a chance to explore, I'm realizing now. Awesome.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
I'm Aga Bayer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast. And this is the Culture Lab team.
Production Manager, Lindsay Nunez.
Ebony Watson, Art Director.
Amanda Taylor, Content Editor.
Sound Producer, James Eade, Be Heard.
That was Yvette Pasqua. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. Yvette and I hope that you will take the ideas that resonated and experiment with them in your own company. And before I give you a quick preview of the next episode, let me just remind you that this one is brought to you by Culture Brain, a one-of-its-kind virtual community for culture leaders and champions who look for new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. So if you care about your company's success and if you resonate with our vision and our values, you might consider joining us as a founding member. Check it out at culturebrain.com. There's a link in the show notes. And now, a quick preview of the upcoming episode. My next guest is Gina Bianchini, the CEO and founder of Mighty Networks, a platform that powers our awesome Culture Brain community. Before Mighty Networks, Gina was the first entrepreneur in residence at Andreessen Horowitz. And prior to that, she was the CEO and co-founder of Ning, a pioneering global platform that created niche social networks, which actually grew to 100 million active users. I wanted to talk to Gina because I see a lot of overlaps between how we build great workplaces and how we build communities, whether they are online or offline, whether they are in office or hybrid or remote. For both, culture is the glue that holds it all together. So in this short preview, Gina talks about what sets a successful community apart from one that fails. Here is Gina.
You know, I've had a front row seat to literally at this point, hundreds of thousands of successful communities. And I've seen an equal, if not greater number of communities fail. What sets them apart is actually something that is very clear, very repeatable, and there's no magic to it. It is a big purpose. So the motivation for your community, there's got to be a reason why you and your members are going to come together. And that motivation, that big purpose, it's got to be interesting. It's got to be exciting, and it's got to be super relevant to the member. And again, there's a very specific structure that makes it so easy to do this. The second thing is progress. A community is a journey. It does not stand still. A community that is standing still or is in a rut is a community that is not bringing value to its members. And I think that this is true for a culture as well. You know, a culture that is not growing, that doesn't have progress as its purpose, becomes less valuable than one that does have progress at its core.
Thanks for tuning in and listening to this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. If you found any moments that were interesting, inspiring, or maybe even game-changing, please share this episode with someone who'd appreciate it. After all, good ideas are meant to be shared. If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab yet, you can do it on any podcast streaming platform of your choice. If you want to receive our weekly insights on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser: tinyurl.com/Aga Bayer. That's tinyurl.com/AGABAJER. Also, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it. And finally, the entire Culture Lab team and our guests, we are going to continue exploring how we can make the word work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, and how we can build remarkable cultures that scale as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing. So, what do you want to hear about next? What matters to you? Email us at lindsay@agabayer.com and let us know.